Drivers, start your engines!
Hit the pace car! What for? Because you hit every other damn thing out there, I want you to be perfect!
When I'm driving, I got a guy on the radio who talks to me. It's him, but he talks to me.
Well, I wanna be a race car driver, pretty girls eating from my hand, yeah. Wanna live a life of fun and danger, no sweating working for the man, alright.
Hey, race fans, welcome to the Hoobazoo Radio Network. Welcome to the Drafting the Circus program, brought to you by Dan Blay Racing Art and by Legend of the First Super Speedway. My name is Frank Santoroski. I'll be your host for the next hour as we talk about this past weekend of racing where we had a full slate of races to talk about. Joining me in the studio, I've got Luis Torres, I have Joey Barnes, and I have my good friend Richard Youden. Fellas, how we doing?
We're good, thank you.
You're doing great.
Playing temperature ping pong.
Temperature ping pong, yeah, hard to stay well. That's it's that time of year. So you're home from California, Louise. You were down there at the Long Beach Grand Prix, which is again one of the classic United States races. Has been going on since the 1970s. Another edition of the race in the books. Another mistake from Colton Herta, where he could have certainly brought that one home, and another victory for Team Penske, making it 3 for 3 in 2022, with Newgarden taking 2 wins in a row, 2 wins on very different styles of race courses, and putting himself into the championship lead. So, Louise, let's start with you, since you spent your weekend down there in Long Beach. What are your impressions? First off, let's talk about how the crowd was there. I heard that we were pushing record crowd numbers down there this weekend, and it just turned out to be a pretty glorious event. Was that is that pretty accurate?
I say it was pretty accurate for sure. There was a lot of people even around the track. There was just a good buzz, even despite the fact we started off the weekend pushing 100, and we ended the weekend in the high 60s. People still showed up, even throughout the weekend. That's how I felt after coming back home.
I can hear the world's smallest violin in the background there, Louise, at 60 degrees.
Oh no, I thought you were sneezing. It's like, yeah, that's how I felt like coming back here. Like, but no. Hey, there's no winter, there's no spring 2022 in Washington, so I enjoyed the sun no matter the temperature. But I digress. But the crowd, yeah, there was a really good crowd, considering this is 7 months ago. We just had a Grand Prix in Long Beach, so the fact there was a even good turnout and twice in a span of 6 to 7 months is really, really good.
Yeah, it just goes to show how strong the product is in that market, and just how deep the roots run for that race. So, but let's start off by talking about Andretti Autosport. Okay, here's a team that desperately needed some good mojo. They had tested at Barber, had a very good test at Barber, and then 3 out of their 4 cars were very strong through practice and qualifying. But they end the weekend with a great finish by Grosjean, who nearly stole the show if he didn't run out of push to pass towards the end there. An okay run for Rossi, and again, like we said, Colton Herta, and then the rookie Devil Di Francesco towards the back at the end of the day. So, Louise, let's talk about these Andretti cars.
Yeah, it started for Alexander Rossi. The result wasn't what he was looking for. He was probably expecting much better than a top 10, but the way the past couple of years, especially the way this season has started, he came into this trail 27th in points, only Di Francesco being lower in points with him among the full-time drivers. So he desperately needed a great mojo, but he was consistently in the top 10 all weekend. And was I expecting him to maybe win it? It was just a matter of how he would qualify. And the thing is that he showed pace, but when it mattered most, he wasn't really quite there. But still, a top 10 is better than being in the bottom 5 in the final result. So it's progress. And as far as Di Francesco, there's really not much to say about Di Francesco. He's just kind of going through the kinks of an Indycar, especially on a street course. So where he is doesn't necessarily surprise me at the moment. But for Colton, Long Beach 2019 and Nashville 2021 all over again. I think where he wrecked might have been the same area he wrecked in 19 as a rookie in the King Taco car that he had once. But man, it's like, I don't know. He locked up it's one of those driver errors that he's got to clean up. And I mentioned if he does not finish well, you might as well write him off of the championship, because right now when you look at his team, Penske and to some extent Chip Ganassi right now running this show. And I'll mention about Ganassi later with Alex Palou, who by the way got a podium out of this ordeal, lost in the shuffle with all things. But it's good to be quiet, but scary quiet results wise, like really good, to where you run really well, but you don't have the results to show for. It's just a costly error, and we talked about this many a times. That stuff got to be cleaned up.
Yeah, it's like Colton. If he's leading, he's fine. When he gets to chasing, is when I think his sense of urgency to get back out front kicks in.
Yeah,
and he just he wants to win at all costs. And again, like I had mentioned this, like Richard and we've all talked about this before. I mean, Richard tends to remind us that Colton Herta is as inconsistent as he is good, which is, as AJ Foyt would say, well, that is quite true. But I mean, when he is chasing, it's what do they call it? Red mist. You get the red mist there, and so again. If you look at guys like that have won multiple championships, like a Dixon or Franchitti, you can point to how many races they won, but you can also point to how many races they didn't win, and still walked home with a good points finish. By not trying to overcompensate.
Like Palou.
How many races did Palou win last year? 2, 3
Just
at most, wasn't it?
3. Barber, Portland, and Belle Isle. No. We won one other one that I can't remember off the top of my head, but I know he.
But it wasn't like
Portland.
a dominant season, was it? But he just, especially on those road courses, just checked off those top 5, positions week in, week out.
Yeah, he only had a skid at the Grand Prix, the second Grand Prix of Indianapolis, and then the incident at
That was when it was raining. I can't remember now.
No, that was when he had that engine problem, like mechanical.
Okay, yeah.
With
But no, I think that. I'm trying very hard not to get on my soapbox, because that soapbox is getting taller and taller every week when it comes to Colton Herta. And we said it last week, didn't we? This is a really, really big race for him this weekend, and he will have known that. He will have known that this is a big race where he's got to go out and prove, especially after his dominant performance not 6 months ago, that he is the title contender, and this was his opportunity to get back on track. And I don't care where he qualified or what he's. How good he was in free practice or whatever. It's just too many mistakes. And even, because he was leading, the first of the race before the first round of pit stops. And you saw this time differential between his pit stops and those of Palou and Newgarden. It's like in-lap pit stop and out-lap. It was about a 3-second loss. And you mentioned earlier, you look at guys like Scott Dixon, and they don't make those mistakes. And it's going to cost the kid. He's going to turn into the next. And goodness me, some pretty incredible talents. But Montoya or Gilles Villeneuve or something like that. Somebody who's undoubtedly the fastest guy in the paddock. But if you can't bring it home week in, week out, what's the point?
Yeah, this is true, because look at Montoya's F1 career. He was one of very few that put it up with Schumacher, but
he's the one who could go toe to toe with Michael on a week in, week out basis, and on any given Sunday could be quicker than him. But he wasn't consistent enough, and he made too many mistakes. And everybody. And I don't want to flog a dead horse with this, but everybody's talking about Colton Herta being the Andretti driver if Andretti gets this Formula One seat, or, he's doing this test for McLaren and all this sort of stuff. Formula One team bosses will be looking at his performance in Indycar and be like, we don't want this. Or we're not even going to touch it. We don't care how fast he is. We have zero consideration for how fast he is. It wasn't like he made a mistake driving flat out. Basically it's brain fade. It's lack of concentration, and you just do not see that in in Formula One. No matter how poor you think a driver is, they're always got pretty good levels of concentration, and very rarely make. And again, I don't want to be overly critical of the kid, but I would call these amateurish mistakes. These are not a mistake when you're trying to compete for a championship in what is considered one of the top 5 single-seater racing categories in the world. You do not make mistakes like that. And maybe having his dad around is a problem. I don't know the dynamic there. I'll tell you now, if that was Gunter Steiner as his team boss, his arse wouldn't have touched the ground for the next 3 days. Maybe he's not getting that drive and that aggression that he needs from a team boss. I don't know. I'm, goodness me, it's totally unfair of me to make these comments, but I'm just speculating here. Maybe there's not that. He's only a kid, and maybe he's just not reacting well to what his dad, the advice he's getting from his dad. I'm speculating. I don't know if you guys have any input on that, but yeah, pure speculation.
Not really, yeah. But so let's talk about a little bit about the guy that did win the race, who was Josef Newgarden, who was certainly on a roll this year. He's got him a good healthy lead in the points now, 2 wins in a row, and we do know that there is that additional big fat paycheck from People Ready for the first driver that wins on all 3 type of courses. A street circuit, an oval, and a permanent road circuit. I believe it's $1 million from People Ready, and Newgarden has checked 2 of those 3 boxes already, and we've got Barber next. Barber, a place where Newgarden has performed well and has a couple of wins there in the past. That could be really, put the icing on the cake for a great start to the season for Newgarden and for Team Penske in general, who's had some good runs out of all their drivers this year. McLaughlin and Will Powers off to a pretty good start. But I want to say, Joey, I want to bring you into the conversation here as well. I know you're a big IndyCar guy, but I want to say, despite Colton leading and Pato bringing it home with a good finish, and Newgarden being in the right place at the right time and driving a near flawless race, I want to say the star of the show was nearly Romain Grosjean.
I guess that's your opinion. I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's a great drive for him, and again, salvage the day for Andretti.
You salvage a day for Andretti, but I look at it from a standpoint of he was the only driver on the last stint on red tires. And if I'm trying to channel like this race in particular, compared to maybe what we had 6 months ago, right? It's the sealer made a dramatic difference. I don't know if that was obviously brand new for the weekend kind of situation, but that in relation to a new red compound, alternate compound that was run in St. Pete, didn't have the same type of degradation differential that we saw in St. Pete. In this sense, you almost looked at it from a standpoint and from what it looked like, literally from the drop of practice on Friday, was that the preferred tire was the primary compound, just because you could get consistent running for longer out of it. And it just looked like the red tires, you were on kind of a knife edge with that. And I think that's part of the reason that you look at Andretti, and even though they come to Long Beach and it's like, oh, we'd love to have that damper program, I think there's something to the fact that that's maybe where the struggle was to some degree. I was seeing Colton fade a little bit beyond the brain fade, maybe possibly, that Richard's kind of alluding to. But I think also just from a standpoint of whenever he was leading, I expected him to be able to yard and get a little bit of a gap. And you didn't know by the end of that first run, okay, Newgarden's within 1.5 seconds before we're getting in laps and out laps. You didn't really necessarily know if we were running into a scenario where Newgarden was managing the gap or if Colton was just trying to conserve. And it wasn't until Pato overcut them by 3.4 seconds is what the over was for Pato to jump both from third to first. I look at it, to me, the star was Newgarden without a doubt. And I think a lot of it's because there's just, sometimes you look at a group and it's like some unique synergy going on. And granted, it's kind of tough to gauge because with all the gaps in the schedule right now, goodness, we've been, the season's been here since late February and we've only run 3 races, and here it is mid-April, which is quite honestly stupid. but if you look at not just the way that they're able to continue to keep, in a weird way, keep momentum when the schedule's losing the momentum. All the new crew members, the new engineer on his box, that honestly is kind of a rookie of sorts, even though he's been an engineering guy within Chevy's Ilmore group and things like that. First time on the pit box making these kind of strategies. I think it's huge. And they didn't necessarily look the strongest every single practice, but when you look at it, they look like the ones that lost the least. And you could defend well. Clean air, I mean, you look at it, nobody had pushed a pass at the end, which was hilarious. You literally saw a straight up fight. And to some degrees, it was nice because you could really see that, the way clean air helps make the difference, but equally like how a driver can still do something. I enjoyed the fact that there was very limited push to pass for anybody late, because it felt like you got to see natural racing, and all three guys brought it. Throw them under a blanket. It was a shame that we had those 2 late cautions, but especially the one with Taku ending up in the tires on the last lap. You were kind of hoping maybe we'd get that last desperation move, but equally, personally, I didn't want to see that end in tears for anybody, because all three of those guys deserved what they got. I think it was definitely something special going on with Newgarden this year. I picked him as my Indy 500 winner before the season, and it's just like the momentum, these 2 races. He's got a kid that's going to be on the way this month too, and it's good to be Josef Newgarden right now. And I think equally, though, you look down the running order, Scott Dixon going from 16th to 6th, and Pato finally getting his stuff together and getting up there and getting the top 5. Some really good finishes by them, and Will Power having the cleanest start to the year that he's had in many, many years. Everybody's getting what they need right now. So it's really setting up for a unique month of May as we get ready for Barber and on to Indy.
I have a quick question. You mentioned in there, and somebody we've been following for the last 2 or 3 years, Pato Award. What do you think your comments? What do you make of the comments he came out with ahead of the race about how he's listening to the people that he needs to listen to, not the people that are trying to talk to him? And a lot of people were thinking that he's been getting outside influences from the McLaren group back over in the UK, rather than just listening to his race engineers here in the US. What are your thoughts on that?
When you're that young, I think you're going to sit there and just kind of be infatuated with the idea of what the potentials are branching to the ultimate goal. Right. And so, yeah, if that is the case, and I don't know if that's the case personally, I haven't had a chance to talk to him about that specific thing, but I look at it and it's, F1's the goal. You're with the McLaren group. You're kind of tied into everything. There's obviously some interesting situations with Colton being involved in there, who he beat for the Indy Lights title. And ultimately, in a weird way, ended up in the ride at Andretti that led to him getting out of a contract with Andretti, that led him to Carlin and then Red Bull's junior team, and then somehow circling back to be full-time in Indycar and being a title contender. It's the most unique journey we've had for
don't forget a bit of super formula thrown in there as well. Don't forget that.
Super formula at the same time when Polo was racing.
We nearly lost Pelot falling through the cracks, a couple of years ago, but now here he is, a solid guy in the series with a solid solid ride. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The thing that I'll say is this, in regards to Pato, I think that it's not the first time that it's been a situation where you've seen him. He likes to listen to people. He likes to absorb everything. And unfortunately, sometimes you kind of, that means your blinders are not up. Right. So I think in some sense, it's just a matter of keeping the blinders up, refocusing. He spent some time in Mexico after Texas to kind of just recharge a little bit. And this is the result right after all of that. So I think it's good for him. I think, everybody's talking about Colton and people are talking about Pato. And, I've been thinking this all off season. If Alex Palou goes out there and just continues to be Mr. Consistent, because last year he didn't have, like you said, he only had 2 wins or so, but he was consistent, right? The average finish was around a 5 or a 6, and won the title. And it's like, if he goes and does that again, like obviously everybody wants to win the 500, but you got to start to look at that and go, is this it for the next 20 years? Like, what's the next challenge for him? It's got like, because he's only 20, he just turned 25.
Yeah.
And it's like, you kind of look at that and go, with the way the cars are in F1, like if you're an F1 team, how do you not look at that? And with more of the crossover, more of the involvement, and now it's starting to feel like a two-way street. You know, IndyCar is not the F1 retirement home for Grosjean, Ericsson, and Chilton. It's starting to look like a two-way street now, where it's also a feeder program. And with the cars being more similar now than they ever have been, with the cost cap and kind of the unique designs of the F1 cars now, you've got to think that there's a reason why people are starting to look at Colton and Pato and cherry picking on this side of the pond.
But you think I 100% agree with you. 100% agree. I think what Palou has done is been fantastic. I think he's gone there and he's, you know, Chip Ganassi is pretty smart when he picks his drivers. He very rarely picks a bad driver, and there's obviously saw something in this kid that maybe some others didn't, and he's been justified in that choice. But on the topic of the potentially, you know, getting him into an F1 seat, I'd be very, very surprised if an opportunity opened up for him. I would be more understanding of an opportunity for Pato or Colton without any doubt. You've got to look at it and what's Palou. Yeah, he's consistent, he's steady, but what's he's had an opportunity. He's been around the series. He's been around the the teams and the people that you need to be around to get a drive in Formula One, and it didn't work for him then. What's going to make it any different now? And unfortunately, we all know that speed and consistency and talent isn't what gets you a drive in Formula One. It's, you know, look at the number of kids that have come through GP2 or Formula 2, won the championship and dominated. But because there hasn't been an open drive in Formula One, they've disappeared off the radar. Then you've had other graduation classes out of GP2 or Formula 2, where 3 or 4 guys have stepped up into Formula One, arguably with poor results, just because those seats are available. And I wonder with Alex Palou that opportunity's been passed now, and I don't think anybody would look at it.
Well, I don't disagree with you, and I'm not trying to say that Palou is necessarily that guy that is going to look at that challenge, but I'm just looking at it from a standpoint of, you know, he's somebody that I don't think should be overlooked because he's only 3 years older than Colton. He's only 2 years older than Pato, and he's already got a championship where the other two don't.
Yeah.
And you know, you look at that scenario, and to play it back a little bit, sometimes the growth and the development comes during that crucial period. And I think like going to Super Formula, building those contacts, you know, being around Team Go, things like that. I mean, there's something to be said about the fact that we've seen the methodical growth from him that maybe is to be seen. But, and I'll go a step further to say this, is that I don't disagree. I think that this is probably being set up for, if we're really being smart, this is the long-term plan to replace Dixon whenever Dixon decides, even if it's another 15 years from now. You know, you look at this and you're like, okay, this is the guy, this is the 1-2 punch, this is the complement to Dixon, this is the Dario kind of mold that Chip's been looking for from the secondary driver, and he's not going to try to let that go. But I think when you start to look at, if we can get the F1 grid expanded with, whether it's customer cars, in my opinion, they're all customer cars unless they're a manufacturer. It's just a matter of how rich you are. But you know, when you look at Andretti's situation, you know, if Colton goes to McLaren, you know, does Andretti, if Andretti's team goes there, does he then finally, bringing up a name that you mentioned, or not a name, but an example, Oscar Piastri, GP, you know, F2 champion that literally should be in F1 right now, that isn't, and it's an absolute travesty. You know, you looking at guys like that, in addition to maybe that's where Pato comes into play. Maybe that's all these different factors, but this is a very unique 2 years that we have. Like this year, next year, we got 2024 with the new engine, but I think it's an interesting scenario because, you know, by then, you know, Colton's going to have enough super license points. The fact that he doesn't is laughable because the weird Indy Lights didn't have enough starters in their championship to give him credit, was BS. But when you start to look at all this, it's really starting to mold itself. And I think that by the time we get to 2024 with the new car, that grid is going to be the grid that we're going to have probably for another 5-10 years, pretty solidly. Like maybe a couple of comers and goers, but if you got to think that if Pato and Colton aren't in F1 by then, it ain't happening. Same thing for Palou, obviously. If he goes and wins the championship this year, if you're AlphaTauri, why not? Why not take the risk?
Because it goes against their purpose. This is one of the problems that we talked about this a number of times on the show. All the young driver programs are becoming so focused that it's difficult to bring somebody else in. Ferrari got a driver academy, Mercedes got the driver academy, Red Bull, McLaren,
and we all know. And something that's been quiet. I don't mean to cut you off, but
no.
One thing that is getting underlooked, we talk about Colton Herta and we talk about Pato and we talk about Alex Palou. Obviously, Colton, the biggest American name currently in the States. But when you start to look over there, Jack Crawford is solidly in the Red Bull program, solidly playing around with Helmut Marko's money, getting promoted, doing everything he needs to do to just progress. And it's not based on results on paper. It's just based on where they see the progression in the data, because they have an idea of, hey, Prima does this, Trident does this, all these other ones, this French and this Dutch team that he was with, they do these, in these championships, and you mold all this. So
you got Logan Sargent, who's part of the Williams Young Driver Development Program.
Yeah, and fortunately too, because Logan was one that I was really worried was going to fall through the cracks, and I think he is. Jack is a good talent. I think Logan not just a mega talent. I think it's good that he has personality. Kyle Kirkwood, obviously over here getting top tens with Foyt, driving his ass off. I mean, I think the world of Kirkwood, and I think we easily could be staring at three guys who could be representing the Stars and Stripes on the grid in F1, but we all know that the way the system works, we're only going to get one.
It's unfortunate because Kirkwood Kirkwood could have had multiple top tens by now had it not been for that whole ordeal at Texas where he got collected in that kerfuffle. Because I thought he had a really good showing at Texas. Same with Long Beach, despite having a little episode and warm up, but he's doing something at that four car that hasn't been seen in a while.
Well, and it's going to be interesting too with how that develops after this year, because from what I've understood, and this is just what's been communicated to me, is that he's only on loan to a Chevrolet team, but he's still technically Honda. Honda loaned him out because they wanted to make sure that he got the seat time and things like that. And if you look at this, it's like, okay, unless there's a buyout where he ends up at Penske or something of that nature, he's going to return to a Honda team next year. Ideally, probably for Honda, that's going to be Andretti to possibly replace Colton or replace Rossi. And where do we go from there with 2024 potentially being an Andretti thing, although Andretti hadn't heard anything from the FIA. So like I said, the next 2 years are kind of fun and wacky. 2024, we're going to have a better idea of what this is really going to look like for years to come.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, one last question on this. I know we need to move on, Frank, but do you think that with this, obviously with Drive to Survive, the 3 US Grand Prix that we're going to have from next year, 2 this year, 3 next year. Obviously, the Liberty Media, the owners of Formula One, obviously putting a huge emphasis on the US market and the desire to have there's no doubt there'll be a desire to have an American driver there. But do you think the teams follow suit with that? And do you think the teams are involved? And do you not think that with all of this progression of Formula One in the US, it's detracting from IndyCar and its place in the American racing scene? Because I've always, I used to watch IndyCar 20 years ago back in the UK, and loved it. And to my mind, it's always been its own unique product. And I just worry, as much as I'm, encouraged to see Formula One branch out into the US, that's going to start diluting the fan base and diluting the talent pool and trying to force, an American driver into Formula One where they don't deserve it. And then when they run around like, no disrespect, Michael Andretti did, it's going to, then people are going to go, well, this was crap, and then stop watching it.
That's an interesting question. I've there's a good friend of mine who's on the F1 beat, who came to Indy. I'm not going to name names, but that's probably everybody could probably zero in on who that is last year. And I remember talking to him, and he goes, I asked him, I said, does the Indy 500, does that actually resonate with people all over the world as the biggest race in the world? Like, if you go, people from Italy and England and things like that. And he's like, well, in England, no, he goes, they'd probably tell you it's some Grand Prix, but then they couldn't tell you what that Grand Prix is. And I find it kind of interesting that if that's the mindset, then I'd be hard pressed to say that what it's going to do is probably divide the fan bases to a natural tendency of, here's your North American, fan bases with the Latifi and the Stroll in Canada and maybe an American. And here's I think it's interesting because if you add up Canada with the
That's
three
a hard
races
sell.
and then Mexico, but I think if you're looking at it from a standpoint of, if that's the mindset with the teams, because that is obviously that infiltrates across the country. So that becomes the mindset of many of the people within the paddock, right? I don't know if that necessarily changes with the product as a whole. I don't know if that forces a rethink. I think that's why the Zach Browns and the Andretti's are important, because that's where you get kind of, hey, let's make this a pure global championship. Let's put our influence in there the same way that France Toast has his. And, you get a little bit of the Italian stuff with Ferrari, and you get a little bit of the Silverstone and Enstone stuff with McLaren. And so it's an interesting situation. I mean, we all know that in order to do it right, you have to base a team in England, because it's just no brainer at this point. But I do think that there needs to be some ties and links by having personnel within America within there. And I don't necessarily know if races change that, but I do know that personnel within the paddock would, in my opinion.
For sure. Yeah. I just wonder if it's, and we've talked about it on the show, the Drive to Survive, the positives and negatives of that show. If it's not, the concept of any American driver isn't going to fall on that same back of a very contrived story. You're putting somebody in there just because they're in there, not because. And Formula One is such a cutthroat industry that I'll guarantee you that if somebody goes over there, say Colton Herta does get a drive, whether it's with Andretti or whether it's with another team, and he has a complete dog's dinner of it and is dropped after 6 races, then all that hard work you've done in creating momentum in the US has failed, because you're trying to manipulate the narrative to put somebody in there.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I think the Vegas thing is so crucial, because when you look at Drive to Survive, it presents F1 as an entertainment soap opera, which is very much, in my opinion, kind of what NASCAR tried to do with the 3 stages and the wreck fest that it can sometimes become. Luckily, the next gen has kind of cleaned some of that up. But when you look at it from the standpoint of a product, the delivery is this, but we all racing purists kind of look at this and go, okay, the racing purists kind of give way to the entertainment, because we accept the fact that that's how you bring in more people. It's how you bring in more sponsors, more money. But I also think that there's a fine line there with, and that's where Vegas, I think, is tricky, because Vegas is going to explode the sport in a totally different way, I think. I mean, you're closing down the strip. What you're going to get there, you're literally going to have, in a weird way, an American version of Monaco in some ways, because of the lights, the glamour, the glitz. And I'm very fascinated to see if the results remain that way. But the one concern, and I think this is shared across everybody, is that you don't want to lose historical events at the cost of widening the calendar. Not to go, I know Frank wants to move on to the next subject, but the one quick thing I will say is this, is that I do think, in my personal opinion, the sweet spot number is 20, not 23, 25, or 30. You do 20, you get your core 5, 10 races, and then you can rotate every other year between other markets, because then you give the markets a little bit of a reprieve from the financial hit that F1 is with the sanctioning fees and the cost of freight, which are astronomical, and you go from there. You can keep your core markets. You say, hey, we'll rotate this, but that's just me.
And there was talk of that a few years ago, wasn't there? 5 or 6 years ago, there was a talk of exactly what you mentioned. Rotating some of these races, but I just worry that they're trying so hard to break the American market at to my mind, at a detriment to IndyCar and potentially NASCAR as well in a similar vein. And if it doesn't work, because I'm not being disrespectful to him, there's no place for a Jimmy Johnson in Formula One, doing what he's doing in IndyCar. Jimmy Johnson deserves his opportunity to race IndyCar, don't get me wrong. But Formula One doesn't work in the same way. Formula One, you have to be on it and you have to be on it now. And if you're running around crashing every other week, you're costing your team millions of dollars. You're going to be out. It doesn't matter what it says on your passport.
Yeah.
And I just worry that
no further than Brett Hartley.
Yeah, exactly. There's so many good, solid drivers that have just, said, look, you're just not good enough. And I really do worry that it can backfire on them massively, this manipulated concept that you need an American driver.
To put a bow on this, the reason why I think why you look at somebody like Colton Herta, though, over maybe a Pato or over some other people, it's not just because of the age and the youth, right? But it's because when you look at him, and I mean this in best way possible, although they're completely opposite as far as different types of demeanor, but Colton Herta has that like fast lap trait that Kimi Räikkönen has, right? Like you look at him and it's like he's youthful, he's quick. If you put him in clean air and you give him an opportunity in the right equipment, I mean, he's for a fact that he's going to be able to go light it up. So,
I mean, like he did last week.
Yeah, exactly. Up until
I've seen a number of times like firsthand, like when he's on, like literally he's on and nobody could stop it. But when he's under pressure, he's
Well, I mean, look at Laguna Seca last year. It was like he was in a different series.
Yeah,
it was almost like
even the one in 2019.
And when you're looking at a series that outside of the damper program is a complete spec series, the driver makes all the difference, and you're seeing the gap of those kind of levels. It's a bit unfair.
Something there for sure.
He grew up in Laguna. That's the home, and that's the track you probably pounded the most laps at. So you look at that and you're like, some of that makes sense for home field advantage, but at the same time, in these kind of cars, to not have a ton of experience. I mean, when you go look at the fact that he's still got less than 40 starts on his resume or something like that, or maybe less than 50 starts, and the fact that he's bagged as many wins as he has, and you look at how quick he's been, I mean, it's impressive, especially when you look at it across the line of data with other drivers and what their results have been. I mean, Rossi just made his 100th start and looked like he was poised to win a title in 20 races by now. And you look at that, and he's kind of stuck on 6-7 race wins and hadn't won since 2019. And
yeah, he's kind of going down the same route as James Hinchcliffe. So, but anyway, guys, we need to probably move on to another topic, and we have been talking about Formula One, and I did want to just throw the one more thought out there about these 3 Grand Prix in the United States, and I kind of wonder how long is that sustainable? Because Formula One has a pretty good history of adding races in the United States that have either failed to catch on or only caught on for a short time. Or
I think globally, not just
or the drivers out flat hated it, like the 80s tracks that they ran.
Phoenix.
Well, I mean, you're talking Phoenix, you're talking Detroit was an absolute mess. The Grand Prix of Dallas never should have happened. And even the previous races in Vegas were kind of, put together a little Mickey Mouse racetrack in the parking lot. So now, of course, COTA is a professional facility. But even then, there's been some questions of the sustainability there, just based on financial.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at that though, to look at that though, I look at 3 markets in the U.S. Yeah, they're in 3 different time zones, 3 big markets too. But 2 of them are on temporary tracks. So I think that's one caveat. But the other thing I'll say is that when you look at Liberty Media, they're kind of trying to see what they can do to collaborate with the Herman Tilke tracks, so that way the Tilke tracks don't end up looking like a total waste for F1. But man, when you look at the multitude of tracks that aren't getting run on, I mean, in India, Turkey, I mean, you think of Korea, there's a lot of tracks that have been built purpose built
Yeah.
just for F1 that country's literally invested in, that no longer gets raced on. So you almost look at
Vietnam didn't even get a race.
No, they didn't, because their promoter got into hot water after the cancellation.
Well, yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
So
but-
speaking of races that did go on, Formula One did in fact race this past weekend, and we can devote a few minutes to talking about that. We saw another victory by Charles Leclerc. We saw podium from Sergio Perez. We saw the Mercedes a little bit improve there, finishing third and fourth. Seem to have some of their problems behind them, but they're nowhere near the dominant car they once were. And another mechanical issue for Max Verstappen, leaving him with a very, very poor finish outside of the points. So, and in between there, somebody forgot about poor Alex Albon, who started last and ran like a 58 lap stint to 10th place. So, but anyway, Richard, let's talk about the Australian Grand Prix for a few minutes here before we start talking about NASCAR.
So yeah, Australia, great to be back for the first time to actually run a race since 2019. Of course, as I'm sure everybody remembers, it was 2020 when we were there. Everybody was raring to go in Melbourne when the world came to a grinding halt, and the Australian Grand Prix was one of the first real sporting events to take a hit. But it was back with the force. This was the largest sporting event in Australian history. I think over 400,000 people turned up for the race weekend, which was a fantastic effort. Track changes, modifications to the layouts of the track there, which personally I think improved the racing. Certainly we saw a little bit more instability in the cars in certain corners, and then it's obviously partly, as I'm sure, as well to do with still the teams getting up to speed with these new ground effect cars. But again, we saw the Ferrari domination. That's the wrong word. It wasn't domination, but Ferrari was certainly the class of the field. Red Bull were close, but probably couldn't, maximize the potential there. And Mercedes was starting to regain some of their little bit of the momentum in small steps. McLaren had a good weekend after arguably two pretty disastrous races in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. The surprise of those first two races, Haas were struggled. So it's, you still the teams are still finding their sort of level, their natural level with these new cars and the like. But I thought it was a fascinating race. Aston Martin had an absolute disaster. Lance Stroll and Seb Vettel, who was making his debut this season after missing the first two races with, after testing positive for COVID, he had some issues, retirements with mechanical issues during practice, and then crashed during the race and got a fine for driving a scooter around. But no, it was just all very, very messy for him, unfortunately. And then Lance Stroll had brain fade during qualifying, I think it was, or practice, and hit Latifi. And it was a real mess for the Aston Martin team. But it was an impressive performance again by Ferrari. One thing that I really did notice this weekend was that this porpoising effect that everybody's been talking about so far this year was very, very noticeable on the Ferrari. Probably more noticeable at Melbourne than it had been the first two races. Whereas the Mercedes, who suffered from this probably the most severely throughout winter testing and the first couple of races, their car looked pretty stable and a lot more competitive. So maybe Ferrari just turned around to the drivers and said, Charles, Carlos, suck it up, boys. This is what you've got. If you want to win the race, this is what you got to do. So there may have been a little bit of that in play. But no, I loved that race in Melbourne. Maybe from my perspective, when I was a kid growing up in the UK, watching these races at sort of 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, there was that sort of nostalgic side of it. But it's a race I've always looked forward to. And typically it was the start of the season as well. So yeah, great to be back. The Australian crowd is fantastic. Puts on, never going to put on race of the season, I don't think, but it always puts on a really good, solid race. I think the changes they made for 2022 have certainly improved the quality of the racing and the track dynamics. And really, really good, solid race. I don't know what the rest of you guys think about it.
Oh, I enjoyed it quite a bit. Yeah, I thought it was a good, solid race. Like I said, again, like you said, certainly not the race of the year, but it wasn't a snooze fest. You know,
No.
It really wasn't. Even though by that point at around 11 o'clock Pacific, my energy was kind of gone. But going all, it wasn't that bad for Honor to put themselves in an excellent spot to arguably being the number one team on the grid. Red Bull, and they need to figure out that reliability stuff with Verstappen. Because the fact Paris made it through without any issues actually did surprise me, honestly. And Sainz, the less to be said about that race, the better.
Yeah, and a couple of drivers had races like that, didn't they? Say Seb Vettel had a race weekend like that. Carlos Sainz had a race weekend like that. It was like, just get me out of here. And then, of course, to make it worse for Carlos Sainz, he has to pose in the photos with Charles Leclerc after he won the race as well, didn't they? It's like, oh, that's you crash out on lap 2, and then you got to sit around for an hour and a half waiting for the race to finish before you can appear in all the team photos. That's a bit of a middle finger up at Carlos there, isn't it?
Yeah, it's unfortunate for his part, but that's just part of F1 sometimes.
Oh, it's part of it, I'm sure.
Certainly, yeah, part of playing the game. So, but like I say, we're fighting the clock here. So I do want to devote a little time to talking about NASCAR's weekend in Martinsville. Speaking of snooze fest, is what a lot of folks felt like Martinsville was, which is kind of uncharacteristic for a Martinsville race. Martinsville has a long history in the sport of being a kind of a bump and run, lean on the other guy. The whole race, spin them, knock them out of the way. It's always been a little bit of a, demolition. Well, not a demolition derby because, a lot of these guys do a lot of beating and banging, but still continue on. But, at the end of the day, a lot of folks were just saying how boring this race was. Even though they shortened it by 100 laps, a lot of folks still felt the race was still much too long. And then the other thing that I think that NASCAR really has done an injustice to Martinsville and the fans there is just the dates that they run Martinsville on right now, which are in April and October. Okay, and this is a race that was traditionally these were in later April and in September. So, but we're talking. This is pretty cold in Virginia at that time. It's not freezing or snowing, but it's chilly enough that it's uncomfortable to sit there for, the day. And it's so, combine the fact that, you're going to be uncomfortable. You're going to be chilly. And then the race is going to be boring. And it's just a recipe for making that thing drop off the calendar, which I would hate to see as one of the oldest tracks in NASCAR. So
it's travesty the way it happened. And we could talk about Bristol too when it comes to weather. It doesn't look that good either this coming weekend. Last time I checked.
For me, living here in North Carolina, Martinsville is the closest track for me. And Saturday night it was pretty close, pretty cold for sure. And I know, Frank, you've been to Martinsville with our good friend and dearly missed friend Gray. On a number of occasions.
When Gray and I went a couple of years ago, it was Halloween weekend.
Yeah,
it was.
It's almost snows up there. It's just
Again,
it's like Martinsville's. We talk about in Formula One the classic races. Martinsville is one of your classic cornerstones of NASCAR with its history and the stories from the venue and
the uniqueness of the layout.
It makes justice doing to it.
It makes you wonder, though, especially the Gen 7 has raced well at some of the places that we've gone to on the NASCAR side. But when you look at this, I think there's still something to be said for the fact that tire degradation is still something that's desperately needed. And you can't hope to get that when temperatures are as cold as they are.
No.
That time of year. It almost looks like NASCAR doesn't even pay attention to the damn calendar.
But the problem is in this sort of part of the world, it was 85 degrees today here. So if the race today, you'd have got 30 laps out of your tyres and they'll be falling off a cliff. So it's a very, it's not like it's June when you're guaranteed 80, 85, 90 degrees. And it's not like, it's like, it can be anywhere, you name it, you can, draw the weather out of a hat sort of thing.
I know that like with IndyCar in particular, there has to be like a combined amount of temperature of 100 degrees ambient and track, whether that's 60-40 or 50-50 or whatever. It has to meet 100 degrees for the cars to be out on track. Does NASCAR have like a set temperature for their cars?
No, I have not heard anything.
Okay.
About
I mean,
NASCAR.
obviously it's different because they're tin tops with wheel wells and things like that, not open wheelers that go 220, 230. But I was just curious.
No, there's no regulations from that perspective, and I mean, but again, sometimes also, I mean, I've been at tire tests with Goodyear in like Atlanta in February, and it's colder than the Arctic Circle. And it's like, why are we here doing a tire test when it's barely nudging 40 degrees on the temperature scale here? You're right. There's sort of like this, like, I don't know what to, not like head in the sand sort of mentality from it, but it's a little bit sort of like you're missing the picture, and they're trying to force like a Martinsville into the calendar rather than giving it the respect, if you like, that it's worth, because you can get some entertaining races there. And in all fairness, it was pretty dull this last weekend.
Yeah, but we did have a winner. We did. Probably should mention that William Byron come home with the win, and at the Xfinity race.
How many races of Hendrick? Yeah. How many faces of Hendrick now won at Martinsville? Ridiculous amount, isn't it?
Yeah, a bunch. Yeah. So
how does Byron?
God, imagine the alarm clocks going off. Imagine those grandfather clocks going off in the Hendricks shop. It'd make a hell of a noise, wouldn't it?
There's something to be said for the fact that William Byron seems to win the dull races. Just throwing that out there.
Let's see.
Well, he's kind of got a dull personality, so it kind of fits.
I mean, let's see. Homestead, I'll remember for that one. I think was that the one where Reddick had a miscue on the last lap? They thought the race was over. That was 2020 when Byron won.
Yeah, it sounds familiar.
But no, it's like real quick on Byron. I've said this many a times, on and off, that if when he starts racking up wins, whether they're boring or not, so far has not been dramatic yet, they're going to be a strong contender. With him and Rudy Fugle, they've worked together in the past, and then the fact that this is their second year in the Cup Series, it's a matter of time they were going to be racking up wins. But to win one that nobody's going to probably remember is kind of a travesty, but we'll see how that 24 camp goes forward.
But the thing is, though, whether the race is boring or not, you get the same amount of points, which is, plus, and your spot in the playoffs secured. But let's real quick talk about the Xfinity race, because the Xfinity race created some headlines by bringing back an age-old NASCAR pastime of the fist fight in the pits after the race, and it was between Ty Gibbs and what was the other?
Sam Mayer.
Sam Mayer, right?
And there's a backstory between those two.
Yeah. Brandon Jones won the race, and to his credit, there were no miscues on the chant in the audience. So,
I don't think anybody cared that Brandon Jones won because they were all invested in the Mayer.
Watching this fight here, and a lot of people are criticizing Ty Gibbs for throwing hands while leaving his helmet on, which is, mind you, a bit of a punk move. But
so no kidding. Because here's the thing about Mayer and Gibbs: before they moved up on the national touring scene, the big thing was who was going to be the future of the sport. Was either going to be Sam Mayer or Ty Gibbs, because Sam Mayer was racking up all those wins in the East Series, even though their car counts have been abysmal, horrendously over the past half decade or so, compared to where we were a decade ago when you had like about 10, 15 of those guys are in the national touring level. But that's besides the point. I felt like Mayer had the advantage because I feel like he had the right team. He was actually doing good, winning races, whereas Gibbs was struggling in the late model scenes for all intents and purposes. He was not setting the store on fire. Then once he was in a Gibbs car And once he was racking up all those wins in Xfinity right out of the gate last year, people forgot about what Mayer was doing. He was a stout in the East. He had that win in the Truck Series at Bristol, but the late start because of his age and having a rather bad rookie year a year ago, everybody's jumping on the Gibbs bandwagon. But everybody knew that Gibbs has had a reputation and an attitude that has rubbed people like the drivers, the garage, the media, and vice versa the wrong way, to where they're very hush-hush about everything, to where we don't know anything until literally the week of the season opener at Daytona, and he will not say it. I don't blame him, but it's just how you're supposed to. I don't know what their method is, but the fact that Gibbs is already getting a bad reputation between Mayer, John Hunter Nemechek, and countless of other drivers, even Ryan Sieg, who had one of the worst get payback incidents of all time, right up there with Danica Patrick and Landon Castle. And Mayer just had enough of it, on top of the fact that both cars were battling for the win. Mayer is trying to get momentum on his side, which he hasn't had so far in Xfinity. It's just baggage of anger and frustration. I don't blame why Mayer felt that way. Yeah, he's got a shiner now, similar to Bianca Belair after her bout with Becky Lynch at WrestleMania. But good grief, we got that East rivalry back and going. It's just a matter of whether or not this will continue going forward. That's the thing. We have those fights, but they never carry on for a lengthy period of time. And
the thing you have to kind of keep in mind here. So here's a guy who's perhaps tabbed to maybe inherit Martin Truex's seat in a year or two. Okay, and but yet this type of behavior and the type of rubbing everybody the wrong way is while he's certainly got an in with the team that that his grandfather owns, it certainly is not. He's not endearing anybody to his fan base, but again, I guess the sport needs black hat villains as well. So now, Richard, I see you want to chime in here.
Oh boy, I've got to drag that soapbox out again, haven't I? Give me a minute, guys.
Okay, get the soapbox. So. You got about 3 minutes.
Okay, 3 minutes. Here we go. Ty Gibbs, absolutely disgraceful behaviour. Should be suspended from racing. Just not acceptable at all. You look at what... If NASCAR are worried about falling spectator figures, which they obviously are over the last few years, they need to look at one thing and one thing only. Formula One. What have they done to increase their viewing share in the United States? Drive to Survive, social media. When Drive to Survive came out, all the drivers saw this massive jump in their Instagram, and Facebook followers. That's what will drive the sport. We all of us on this call here, we all peruse the Facebook groups that are tongue-in-cheek NASCAR and diehard NASCAR, and the diehard fans were like, oh yeah, good old boy Ty, sorting it out like a true man, and all. What a little crap. Sorry guys, that isn't what's going to grow the sport. Growing the sport is the social media interaction, getting the young people engaged with it, all that sort of stuff. And that sort of behavior, 2% of the potential audience may like that, but the other 98% go, what a load of idiots, and turn it off.
Yeah, that was me when I found out about it at Long Beach.
We need, Formula One has played the game perfectly with how to increase its fan base. Whereas NASCAR keeps getting there a little bit, like more road course thing is great. But then NASCAR go, oh my God, all of our old guard are turning away, so we need a good fight, and then we're not going to do anything about it. And then the people that they have attracted go, oh, geez, look at these guys. I don't want to watch people fight. Really, I want to watch the racing and all this sort of stuff. So they need to make an example of this. I don't care who his grandfather is. I mean, I've worked for a team that employed a grandson, and it doesn't get you anywhere. Go out there, sort it out, and make a statement. In 2022, that is not the way to solve a problem. Sort it out, guys. NASCAR, you've dropped the ball on this. You had an opportunity to make a stand and really, draw a line in the sand and show where you are as a sport, and they failed miserably.
Yeah, $15,000 fine to a guy who was born into wealth.
But it wasn't even for the punch.
No, it was for something on pit road. Which was the
He's
thing
got
that
nothing. That is an assault. He could, the guy could press criminal charges for assault. If you did that in a street to somebody that took your parking spot and punched them in the face, what's going to happen to you?
Yeah, it makes me wonder if NASCAR are ever going to give that Bristol fine that they gave Gordon for shoving Matt Kenseth back, because I mean Gordon got fined for it, but a punch, yeah. But on top of the fact an official got injured, and that's what really aggravated me, because mostly for the fact that we lost an official last February for a confrontation in name of Rusty Cruz and New Smyrna. While I wasn't there when it happened, I was covering that whole race weekend at New Smyrna, and it shook the entire track, officials, and community and it kind of carried on for the rest of the week.
All right, so we are out of time. so where are we racing this? With Easter, right? So the bulk of the series are off, but however, NASCAR is racing on Easter Sunday, much to the chagrin of the religious right. But we will be on the
if we have racing on time,
we will be on the dirt track in Bristol, where they will be putting
the
mud flaps on the car. I saw some images of the mud flaps that are being installed on the car. So let's all, I guess, take a moment and try to make us a pick for Bristol Dirt. And Joey, I'll start with you.
Daniel Suarez.
Okay, and Louise.
Christopher Bell,
very good. Richard.
Oh, jeez. I mean, how do you pick a winner for this?
No, I mean, it's like, whoever survives a shit show.
Exactly. It's let's just, because it'll wind up so many people. Bubba Wallace. Go on, Bubba.
Oh, that'll wind people up. Yeah. So, and I'll
he does have a third window to his credit.
Yes, he does.
I knew that.
So I'll go with Joey Logano, just because he won the thing last year. So he's
picking a Penske guy. Who knew?
Right?
Well, nobody picked Larson. Amazed.
You know what? Larson's probably a good pick, man. That guy's got a lot of wins on dirt. However, we are out of time, so I want to thank Dan Blay Racing Art. You can find them on Facebook. Get your custom IndyCar diecast made from Dan Blay or his son Michael, who are both expert modelers. Also, Legend of the First Super Speedway, a fine book by Mark Dill. You can find them on the internet at firstsuperspeedway.com. Order the book, as well as look through a treasure trove of racing history information. And I want to thank Spreaker, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and iHeartRadio, and the Hoobazoo Radio Network. And I want to thank you, Joey, Louise, Richard. But most of all, I want to thank you folks who listen to us. So until next week, good night.
WHOOBAZOO, that's Hoobazoo.com.
Enter website.